Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
More on George Osborne now. The former Chancellor, who's been pictured here in the Standard's newsroom today, will take on the role 4 days a week from early May and will stay on in his role as the MP for Tatton.
Well, here he is speaking to staff this morning at the Standard's headquarters in central London.
There's a lot written about how challenging newspapers are at the moment. And the challenging world of journalism. Well, you know, personally, as someone who's been on the other end of it, I would say there's never been a more important time to be a journalist. There are so many big issues in our world, so many big things at stake about our country. And where are the people who are going to make these decisions, the voters, going to turn to for the information? You know, where are they going to turn to for the facts? Where are they going to turn to for the analysis? Where are they going to be able to turn to help them form their judgments? Well, there is only one place. It's this kind of newsroom and the features you do. There's never been a more important time, in my view, for journalism, and that is why I'm so excited to be taking on this role. And I want you to know that we speak for London. And although I'm a Member of Parliament, my job here is to help you speak for our readers. And we will say what we want to say about the government, about London politicians, about any issue that comes up on the basis of whether it's good for London or not. And that is the only basis upon which we will judge things. So we've got a big job because people out there, they do want the facts, they do want that analysis, they want great journalism, and we're going to provide it. Thank you very much.
Well, George Osborne actually spoke to London Live a little earlier on.
Look, I'm a Member of Parliament. I'm proud to represent my constituency. Of course, this paper is edited primarily in the morning. Parliament votes in the afternoon. Crucially, though, people need to know this. I will speak for London and Londoners through this paper as its editor. And we will judge whatever the government does, whatever the mayor does, against that simple test. Is it good for London or isn't it? And if it isn't good for London, then we will say so, and we won't be afraid to do that. If it's good for London, we will, of course, back it. So we will be fearless and we will be independent in our approach, because that's what people want from a newspaper. And at times like this, that's what journalism is for, to provide people with the evidence, the facts, the analysis, then they can make their own judgments.
And he's been busy in front of cameras today. Here's what he had to say as he left the Standard's offices.
Well, I'm thrilled and excited to be the new editor of the Evening Standard. And, you know, with so many big issues in our world, what people want are authoritative facts, good analysis, great news journalism. It's a really important time for good journalism, and the Evening Standard is going to provide it.
But people are saying that you're not going to be able to fit in your job as an MP as well and according to your reputation. What do you say to that?
Well, there are plenty of examples of MPs who have edited newspapers and magazines over the years, and I'm going to continue to play a big part in British public life, and I'm looking forward to it.
So you've also got a job at the bank as well, so I mean, you can't possibly do all three.
I'm going to work hard to make sure the Evening Standard is a fantastic publication and the go-to place to get your news and information in this exciting age.
And why are you doing
Mr. Osborne, can you guarantee a free press?
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll just stop you there for a second.
Mr. Osborne, are you going to resign? Can you guarantee a free press in London whilst you're a sitting MP?
There we go.
Mr. Osborne, will you stand down as an MP?
Yes, he didn't manage to answer that question, did he? I'm not sure if he heard it. What do you think?
It slipped his mind, that last question, by the looks of things.
Well, the appointment has been met with some amusement on Twitter from George Osborne's political rivals. Former Labour leader Ed Miliband announced the shock news that he's soon going to be in charge of celebrity mag Heat.
While the Liberal Democrat leader Tim Farron says he's going to be applying for a job at the adult comic Viz. I should tell you that Viz actually got back to Tim Farron and said
yes, they did.
He starts Monday, apparently.
You've got the job, Tim. Well, on a more serious note, however, the Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn had this pithy response. It's taking multitasking to an extreme level. What a joke.
And the former London Mayor Boris Johnson was much more supportive than that, saying brilliant appointment for the Evening Standard and good for London. Hooray.
Well, the move to make George Osborne the editor of a London newspaper has not gone down well with some campaigners. Transparency International have tweeted this. The proposition is that a sitting MP from the governing party is appointed editor of a major British newspaper, in addition to his new position as a highly paid city advisor. It smacks of greed and the accumulation of power, undermining the government's intention to create a country that works for everyone.
Hello again. Just want to go back now to our top story. George Osborne has been announced as the new editor of the London Evening Standard newspaper. Sky's Joe Tidy is in Kensington for us this afternoon. A very good afternoon to you, Joe. So what are staff saying to you? Are they pretty surprised by this appointment?
They're absolutely stunned, yes, and I think the reactions say it all. I spoke to one journalist in one newsroom who said that the announcement was met with gasps of shock, but another journalist in another newsroom said that it was met with guffaws of laughter. So I think everyone is pretty stunned by the announcement here. No one saw it coming at all, even, of course, the Evening Standard journalists themselves, who only found out a short time before being given that opening speech by who will be their new boss in April, George Osborne. And now I think the disbelief and the shock will be subsiding this afternoon towards more questions of how will this actually work, because certainly from speaking to people here, the Evening Standard, the editorial job there is extremely demanding. I mean, they come in for the early morning meetings and conferences very early, from anywhere between 4, 5 and 6. They have their big morning meeting at 8 o'clock, which obviously the editor will have to be at, and then they put the paper to bed at about 12 o'clock, 12:30 in the afternoon. So the questions here are going to be what sort of an editor will George Osborne be? There are obviously different degrees in terms of how hands-on different editors are, but certainly a lot of questions here about how it's actually going to work with him being a full-time MP as well.
How is it going to work? Let's talk to Dawn Butler, who is the Labour MP for Brent Central. She is in North West London. Many thanks indeed for joining us this afternoon. So, Dawn, how is it all going to work?
Well, that is the big question. I mean, when I first heard, I was completely shocked. I thought, really? How and when did this happen? And then I thought, we obviously will have a by-election on our hands. And then Osborne announced that he wasn't stepping down and there'd be no by-election. So that means that this is increasingly going to be a difficult task for Osborne to balance working as an MP and also being editor of the Evening Standard, and in addition having his other job. And then my feelings kind of turned to anger, because I thought that my constituents in Brent have to work 3 jobs, but obviously they're having to work 3 jobs to make ends meet. And so I do feel quite resentful that Osborne is in this privileged position, having 3 very, very well-paid jobs, and what he earns in a day, my constituents do not earn in a year. So I don't know how he's going to balance the job. I don't know how he's going to balance his opinions. But I do think, and I try to look positively at things because I am quite a positive person, I do think because him and Theresa May, the Prime Minister, they do not see eye to eye, I think that now is the really pivotal moment in these Brexit negotiations, that we need the media to hold the Prime Minister to account on the Brexit plans. And I think that's probably one good thing that Osborne will do, is that he will hold the Prime Minister account into her plans for Brexit, what she's doing and how she's doing it. So I've gone through a whole wave of emotion and I've come to that point.
Mr Osborne has said that the paper is edited in the morning, Parliament votes in the afternoon. He's going to be working 4 days a week for the newspaper. The vast majority of people may not be able to do it, be able to juggle all those things, but as long as he can represent his constituents in Tatton, he can do that job as the editor of the London Evening Standard, he can do his other jobs, as long as there's no conflict of interest, then what's wrong with that?
Well, you've mentioned 2 things there. One is a conflict of interest. Being a Conservative MP and being the editor of the Evening Standard, the largest print media that we have in London, is in itself a conflict of interest. So he fails on that first point.
He did say quite clearly that he's going to be working in the interest for London. If the government does something and it works for the benefit of London, then he will stand up and say, yes, that is for the benefit of London. If it's not, he will call the government up on this and he will question that and challenge that. That is what you'd expect from any news editor.
And I believe that George Osborne, loves London. I believe that, and I think he will do his best to fulfil his duty in that regard. So I do believe that. But there is a conflict. No matter what way you cut that cake, there is a conflict. So he has to understand that. And maybe he will overcompensate for that. Who knows? We'll have to wait and see. The proof of the pudding will be in the tasting, as they say. But in terms of his time, saying that he will be being an editor in the morning and then being able to be an MP in the afternoon, well, I do constituency events in the morning. I visit schools in the morning. Sometimes I have a coffee morning. So he will do none of that as his role as an MP. All of that will be off the table. That's quite worrying. And I mean, if he was a Labour MP, that would not happen. He would not be allowed to hold such a big job and also be a Labour MP, because that is against our rules. The leader of the Labour Party says that's not allowed, and also preferably would like to see a cap on outside earnings of MPs. We've had this debate after sort of many scandals, and that is the common thought. So George Osborne earning so much money, doing another job, I think is a bit of a slap in the face to most Londoners who are struggling to make ends meet.
I guess he's working to market forces. That's not his fault. That's what the market demands, so be it.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is what he earns in a day, my constituents do not earn in a year. But yes, he's very privileged, obviously. He has these 3 jobs. He's got a journalist editor position without even being a journalist ever. No qualification, but yet still he's able to be the editor of the Evening Standard. He's in a very privileged position in more ways than one. But he will find it very difficult to fulfil his job, in my opinion, as an MP, as an editor, and as the editor of the Evening Standard. But we will all be waiting and watching and holding our breaths to make sure that he does right by London. And as I say, as we're coming up to these Brexit negotiations, it is vital that there is a transitional arrangement in regards to the Brexit plan, because no plan and plunging into WTO tariffs will be devastating for London. So I'm pretty sure that Osborne will take that part into account.
In a move that's astonished his fellow MPs and outraged some, the former Chancellor George Osborne has been appointed editor of the London Evening Standard daily newspaper. Mr Osborne says he'll combine the role with his job as MP for Tatton, as well as at least one other job working for an investment company. Here's our media editor Amol Rajan, who broke the story.
George Osborne rose from young Tory advisor to shadow chancellor at the age of just 33. But 6 years after taking charge of rebuilding Britain's economy following the financial crash, he was sacked by Theresa May after the Brexit referendum. But stop press, today he made a career change, or at least half of one. In a shock announcement, Osborne has been appointed editor of the London Evening Standard, a job he will do while continuing to be an MP.
I'm thrilled and excited to be the new editor of the Evening Standard. And, with so many big issues in our world, what people want are authoritative facts, good analysis, great news journalism. It's a really important time for good journalism, and the Evening Standard is going to provide it.
In a few weeks' time, George Osborne will take the editor's chair in this building. He'll arrive at 5 a.m. and leave around midday. But I spent years here too when I was editor of The Independent. And I can tell you that there are managerial and commercial responsibilities too. Some editors have been known to work up to 100 hours a week. So the question that Standard staff are asking is, how do you reconcile being a hard-working editor with being a hard-working MP? In his Tatton constituency in Cheshire today, this is how some voters reacted.
Obviously thrilled for George remaining in the public spotlight. I guess one just hopes that he will continue his constituency duties. To me, you should either be that one or that one. Make one of them your job.
I don't have a problem with George Osborne doing that. I thought he was an amazing Chancellor.
Mr Osborne will be paid substantially less than his predecessor, but then perhaps he doesn't need the money. The 45-year-old already earns nearly £75,000 as an MP. He took home over £750,000 in the past year for speeches, and he makes £650,000 a year for 4 days' work each month at asset manager BlackRock.
I thought it was fake news when I heard it to begin with. And I said, why is he doing it? Well, it's not for the money, because he's got plenty of money for elsewhere. I can only conclude it is that he wants to build the Standard into an alternative power base to Theresa May. And in the event of Brexit all going pear-shaped, he will use this power base to launch his attack.
Some have said there's a clear conflict of interest here. Others have questioned George Osborne's commitment to Parliament.
He's very clever and he's very able, but this is ridiculous. How can you edit a daily newspaper, the Evening Standard, which is for London, represent a Cheshire constituency and be a director of a bank all at the same time?
He may be no stranger to the headlines, but George Osborne has limited journalistic experience and credentials. This surprise appointment will intrigue Westminster and readers of the Standard. The likelihood is that he'll be a newspaper editor long after he's MP for Tatton. Amal Rajan, BBC News.
Well, let's talk to our political correspondent, Ben Wright, who's at Westminster. I mean, that goes to the heart of it, doesn't it, Ben? To what for most people would be full-time jobs, and there's other jobs as well, and George Osborne is claiming he can do them all.
Yeah, it's going to be a very, very difficult juggle for George Osborne, Fiona, but he claims that he can edit the newspaper in the morning and then carry out his duties in Parliament in the afternoon. But that's a claim met with mockery by a number of MPs during the day who say that's simply not doable. Two opposition MPs have said he should stand down now. Jeremy Corbyn, the Labour leader, has said this appointment is an insult to Mr Osborne's Tatton constituents. A constituency, I should say, that is being abolished. The boundaries are being redrawn at the next election, and that clearly must feed in to this decision that George Osborne has made. The last time a sitting MP was the editor of a daily newspaper was actually 100 years ago, so there's distant precedent for this. And I think some people might feel that this is a classic example of a well-greased revolving door working very well for people with the right connections. So it is an extraordinary appointment, but it's a politically significant one too. George Osborne has been quite clear that he doesn't think the government are prioritising the economy enough as it approaches these Brexit negotiations. And now, back in the front line of politics, he has a very powerful platform to make his case, reflect the views of London readers who voted strongly for Remain in the EU referendum, and hold Theresa May's government to account.
Ben Wright at Westminster, thank you.
Well, George Osborne's decision to take up a whole new career in journalism has been greeted with a mix of shock, outrage and derision by his critics. Jeremy Corbyn said it insults the voters he's supposed to serve. But are his Tatton constituents happy to see Mr Osborne juggling his role as their MP with at least 5 other jobs? Simeon Brown has been to find out.
George Osborne always liked wearing high-vis jackets, and since stepping down as Chancellor, has become a jack of all trades. Today, he's picked up a new one, editor of the London Evening Standard.
I'm thrilled and excited to be the new editor of the Evening Standard. There are plenty of examples of MPs who have edited newspapers and magazines over the years, and I'm going to continue to play a big part in British public life, and I'm looking forward to it.
But how can a man who occupied power now scrutinise it as his 6th job on a fairly long list? Alongside his new position, he's a fellow at the University of Arizona, a big player in the lucrative speakers circuit, and an asset management advisor. He's also chair of the Northern Powerhouse Partnership, and he is still an MP.
This is ludicrous. This is multitasking taken to an unbelievable degree. We're elected to represent people and to undertake political representation of our communities. Is Tatton going to be forgotten? Is the Evening Standard going to be forgotten? Is the bank going to be forgotten? What's going to be forgotten? It's ridiculous.
Considering how busy Mr Osborne will be now, just how much time will he be spending here at his constituency office? He already earns more in one speech than his entire parliamentary salary. Add this to his £650,000 income as an advisor to corporate giant BlackRock. It's a wonder just how he plans to fulfil his parliamentary duties. This is the question his constituents are asking.
He shouldn't be doing that. Should be an MP. Disgusting.
So do you think, therefore, that George Osborne should resign as MP for this area?
Yes, I think so. Definitely.
I would very much hope that he'll still dedicate the time to looking after Knutsford. He'll have to challenge himself what sort of hours is left.
Do you feel that you can get the representation that you need? Do you give him your blessing?
Absolutely not. No, he's not going to be local, is he? He's going to be based in London and, you know, he should be dealing with local issues.
Martin Bell is Mr Osborne's predecessor and is concerned about conflicts of interest.
Suppose a vital editorial meeting in the Standard coincides with a vital vote in the House of Commons, what does he do? If I were a constituent of Tatton, as I was once its MP, I would need some assurances.
Now, Mr. Osborne has not broken any rules. Perhaps that's part of the concern. How do constituents ensure their politicians work primarily for them if their secondary earnings reduces their parliamentary salary to pocket change?
The former Chancellor George Osborne today completed a remarkable hat-trick of jobs routinely adjudged by the British public to be done by some of the most despised members of society. Already a politician, of course, he recently became a banker of sorts on £650,000 a year for a one-day week. And today, with his unexpected appointment to the editorship of the London Evening Standard, he is set to become a journalist. A few youthful shifts on the Telegraph's diary column and an unsuccessful attempt to join the Times graduate scheme notwithstanding, the calibre of his journalistic credentials remains somewhat unclear. So, what is the paper's proprietor, Evgeny Lebedev, hoping to get for his money? And what problems might Osborne, who clearly doesn't need it, find in his in-tray when he starts work in May? Newsnight's David Grossman reports.
Nothing wrong with a hard hat and a hammer. Kind of glue and sticks this world together. Hands of steel and cradle of the promised land. God bless the working man.
During his time as Chancellor, George Osborne was famously fond of being photographed in a hard hat. He might do well to reach for one today because there are plenty of brickbats coming his way.
Nothing wrong with a hard hat and a hammer.
As Mr. Osborne addressed his new newsroom at the London Evening Standard, many were already asking how on earth a sitting MP so recently in power can now become a newspaper editor.
He's meant to vote, for example, on legislation with independence in the interests of his constituents, but now he is the editor of a major newspaper which takes a lot of money from advertisers that I'm sure he has to keep sweet. Will he be conflicted when voting on legislation? Will he be thinking about the needs of his advertisers rather than his constituents?
Mr. Osborne's new job does make it onto the front page of his new paper, although the main splash is reserved for a supposed moped maniac on the M11. Friends of Mr. Osborne have told Newsnight that he's taken this job because he felt that at 45 he was too young to retire, and that editing a paper like the Evening Standard is exciting, it's new and it's challenging.
But who will Mr. Osborne now be speaking for?
I will speak for London and Londoners through this paper as its editor. And we will judge whatever the government does, whatever the mayor does, against that simple test. Is it good for London or isn't it?
In his constituency, 130 miles away in Cheshire, definitely not in London, the news of the MP's new job was greeted by some with incredulity.
What? He's going to be the editor of the Evening Standard in London. We're asking people what you think about that.
I don't think very much of it, to be quite honest. He's not a journalist, is he?
Well, he's going to be the editor of the paper.
That's what I mean, he's not a journalist, so how on earth can he be an editor?
Which brings us on to the next problem.
Mr. Osborne, will you stand down as an MP?
Mr. Osborne says he will work as a newspaper editor 4 days a week, but only until lunchtime.
This paper is edited primarily in the morning. Parliament votes in the afternoon.
I mean, you can work as many hours as you like, but to do the Evening Standard properly, you have to work a lot of hours. And I think also you should be an outsider. I mean, George, a former Chancellor, is the ultimate insider, while still being a Member of Parliament. You haven't relinquished any of that. You're sort of party priest, a whole heap of things. Journalists are outsiders. That's sort of what we do. We question things, we challenge things. You can't be part of too many great institutions.
And it's not like he hasn't got plenty of other jobs as well. Since being sacked by Theresa May last July, he's earned £771,000 for public speaking, although these engagements don't seem to take too much of the MP's time. In November, he earned £85,000 for a speech to City, which, according to the Commons Register of MPs' interests, only represented 3 hours' work. He then gets £650,000 a year as an advisor to BlackRock Investments in return for just 1 day a week's work. He also will get an unspecified number of shares at a later date. And then there's another £120,000 he gets as Kissinger Fellow at the McCain Institute, making a total of £1.54 million. And that, of course, doesn't include his full-time job as MP for Tatton.
Among Mr Osborne's fellow Conservative MPs, the reaction to his new job hasn't been uniformly good. One told us it makes us all look like part-timers on the make. Another wondered whether he planned to use his new position to try and frustrate the government's attempts to get a clean Brexit.
And even MPs who are supportive of Mr Osborne admit that they worry about what he might have to do to prove his impartiality as a newspaper editor.
Well, I think if you're a Conservative MP, far from the conflict of interest benefiting the Conservative Party, I mean, I think that, you know, one will have to make sure, one will hope that George won't overcorrect and actually perhaps be a little more critical of the Conservative Party than the Evening Standard has been. And also the politics journalists of the Evening Standard are well known. They're very strong-minded people. I'm not sure they're going to allow George Osborne to interfere, and nor would he want to do so in the political coverage.
God bless the working man.
Labour have tonight written to the Permanent Secretary of the Cabinet Office asking for an investigation into whether Mr Osborne has broken the rules on former ministers taking new jobs. Mr Osborne shouldn't perhaps remove his hard hat just yet.
David Grossman reporting. Now, Simon Jenkins is a former editor of The Standard who now writes for The Guardian, and Rachel Johnson has written for the paper but now has a column in the Mail on Sunday. Simon, before we get stuck in, actually, if you were editing a paper tonight and this was your front page story tomorrow, would you lead with the fact that he has no experience at all, or would you lead with the fact that he's staying on as an MP?
I can't lead with the fact that he's staying on as an MP, but I'm not sure that's totally this year. I have to say I also write occasionally for the Evening Standard, so
Of course, so you have a vested interest. He's your new boss.
He's my, I suppose, my new boss, I hope.
And that's the logistical question of whether or not, before we even talk about conflicts of interest, whether or not there are enough hours in the day to edit a newspaper you have edited and to represent the good people of Tatton.
Well, I mean, the Editors' Union will be querying 4 days a week and half a day as well. But come on, editors have been bizarre people throughout history. Before the war, they were all politicians, effectively. I think that's a big problem in itself. He's got to organise his day. I'm assuming he'll be a sort of editor-in-chief and someone else will run the paper. You cannot run a paper half a day. But George Osborne's an intelligent man. He's appreciating, you can appreciate that. A much more problematic thing for him, I think, is really whether he can be a poacher in the morning and a gamekeeper in the afternoon. I mean, journalists have gone back and forth, but they haven't done the same job at the same time. And I think it is difficult, it really is, and he's aware of this, I'm sure. It is difficult to, to slam off your friends in the morning and go and talk to them in the afternoon. He is a party politician, and you can do that, 1 year and then be an editor another year, but to do it within the course of 24 hours, I think you'll find it very difficult. I mean, it's going to be interesting to see.
And the conflicts of interest, Rachel, just off the top of my head, what happens if the chief reporter at The Standard comes in with a big scoop about the unfolding Conservative expenses problems and say we've traced this one all the way back to the then Chancellor boss?
I think it's going to raise a big question. Which is his day job? Is it editing The Standard, or is it being a loyal Tory backbencher? And I suggest that it's probably going to be the former, because
he can't be both.
His constituency in Tatton is being redrawn anyway. It interests me that he's not decided to dump the voters of Tatton already. Evgeny Lebedev has described him as a Londoner through and through. It might be news to them. And it just strikes me that he feels he has more power running a newspaper, however many hours in the day he does so, than he does as a backbencher, where all signs of dissent are stifled by the autocracy of the Tory right, and his passion for the Remain cause and for Europe he's not allowed to give voice to that, because he's called an enemy of the people and stamped on. So of course he's had to leave Parliament in order to make these points using a very effective platform of a big London daily free sheet, and so good for him.
Good for him. You sort of, because it gives him the freedom to say the things he doesn't
also,
have the freedom to say as an MP.
On a selfish perspective, he's saying the things that I don't think enough people are saying, and people are being quelled. Look at all the MPs who actually voted Remain, who then had to vote for Article 50. Dissent is no longer permitted in Parliament. Dissent, luckily, is still permitted in the press.
for now. The other question, of course, that springs to mind, Simon Jenkins, is whether or not there is a bigger game plan. You try and work out what he hopes to get out of this, and you can't help observing that for most people, presumably yourself included, achieving the editor's chair is the end of a process. There's a suspicion this is the beginning of a process, but no one's quite sure what that process is.
I think you're dealing with an intelligent man. He's got a game plan of some sort. We're not privy to it. I think editing a newspaper is more fun than being a backbench MP, and I think he probably thinks that too. But where he's going, we don't know. It's inherently not sustainable. It has to be said. It's inherently not sustainable.
Riding two horses.
Riding these
How long would you give him?
These particular two horses. But and I'm not going to underestimate this guy. The fact of the matter is, he will be watched very closely for the things that Rachel was mentioning. His own staff are going to be watching him like a hawk. They're going to be teasing him with stories about his friends in Londoners' diary. I mean, it's going to be hell for him at times. But it won't be dull.
Londoners' Diary, for people outside the capital, is the gossip column that has a very political bent at the best of times, and possibly will have an even more political one now.
I think I have to say, I think what is good news for the Standard is he will not have taken this job without promises of investment and jobs and so on, because without that he will be discredited. So he's got to have been given various understandings, which is going to be good for that newspaper.
But that itself speaks of an understanding of how newspapers work, and I don't think it would be uncharitable to suggest there's not a great deal of evidence to support the idea that he has the vaguest understanding of how newspapers work.
Well, you do an editorship for half a day, you will not be the pucker full-time editor of that newspaper. He's got a good team there, they're very good people working with him. He will be effectively, I think, an editor-in-chief. It's perfectly feasible. It's been done before. It's perfectly feasible in
I was
itself.
thinking more that, as you mentioned, resources and investment, he's not going to know where best to put the money.
Well, he'll have people who tell him. I mean, he will have a very close relationship with Lebedev, the proprietor. That's given. That's the best security any paper can have.
What's in it for him?
What's in it for him is his long-term game plan.
No, for Lebedev.
For Lebedev, he's got a star editor. He's got access to people in power, things that proprietors always love about owning newspapers.
Not that this is necessarily the most popular angle to adopt, but showing some sympathy for the ordinary journalist now. I sort of, forgive me if I've got my years slightly wrong, but how would you have felt when you were poised to assume the editorship of the Times, and then it was announced that Norman Lamont had got the job?
I'd have been very annoyed.
Yes.
Quite right.
And someone like you, Rachel, I mean, you might have thrown your hat into the ring for this job or similar, and it turns out that a former Chancellor can come out of nowhere.
James, you're right. If I'd known a few weeks ago that somebody with less experience than the messenger boy on the Brighton Evening Argus was going to take the helm of one of the largest circulation newspapers in the country, I'd have been in there like a rat up a drain pipe. But, you know, there we are. In the old days, journalists aspired to be politicians. In the new world order, the new crazy world we live in, politicians are aspiring to be journalists. So what does that say about the relative power bases of Parliament and the Fourth Estate? I don't know, but it's interesting that he clearly thinks he can have more fun and more influence doing both.
Doing that
He's
job
not actually having to choose at the moment, is he?
No, but
it's the new politics. It really is.
At risk of this list becoming endless, he's also the chairman or the chairperson of the Northern Powerhouse Partnership. It's an unpaid position, but I think he's going to scrape by, isn't he, with some of his other remunerations.
We're all in this together. He's in his 5 jobs together.
Yes. £2,700 per person in London spent on transport. It's £201 in Yorkshire. It's £5 in the North East. How is he going to be able to represent the Northern Powerhouse while also, as both Lebedev and him have said today, campaigning for the sort of rights and pleasures of Londoners?
Well, when he was Chancellor, he spoke about the Northern Powerhouse, but he channelled money into London. It's the Southern Powerhouse. He's now running the Southern Powerhouse.
And the North can whistle.
Well, to be fair, I mean,
from his point of view.
From his point of view, you better ask him. I sense he's seen where his future is. It's in London.
Whenever anyone says they're passionate about anything in a statement, you know they're talking through their hat.
Jacob Rees-Mogg has suggested this may be a precursor to a mayoral bid. Does that hold any water for you? No.
That's a new one, but I mean, I'd believe anything at this stage. By the end of this interview, he'll probably be the Director General of the BBC.
I think he might be presenting Newsnight on Monday,
exactly.
So I have to double-check the roster. The 1922 committee, it's supposed to be, of course, a very confidential conclave. It's not really supposed to have any outlets to the outside world, and yet you're going to have the editor of a daily newspaper sitting in it. I mean, can you imagine he's going to be under pressure to bring in scoops? Because if he is, we're going to have all sorts of problems.
Evgeny should sack him if he doesn't.
Exactly. Well, this is it.
I mean, this has happened before. You've had this very, I mean, Bill Deeds, people like that. You had this very close relationship between editors, chairs and politicians. And in the old days, the editor of the Daily Herald was in and out of the Labour Party office.
But those were the old days, Simon. We've got Leveson now, press regulation, and all those things.
The old days aren't over yet. And I mean, I just think, I mean, you're right to point it out. I think he's going to have a lot of trouble in that area, largely because people are going to be watching.
And on a personal level, or a sort of blend of the personal and the political, what about negative stories regarding David Cameron or some of his other political allies? Could you, as a former editor, can you foresee enormous tensions if the troops are somehow prevented from bringing their stories to the paper?
No, they won't be. They'll be encouraged to do so by the prospect of possibly embarrassing their editor. I mean, I think, I mean, the internal dynamics of a newspaper are changed when the editor is in that sort of position. Now, I just assume George Osborne knows what he's doing. But there will be one after another embarrassment for him. I mean, editors have it anyway. They have their friends in the gossip column.
But you speak so casually because you're so immersed in that world. He's just not. Do you have any fears at all for his sort of well-being?
If he's not, he's got a problem, all right? I mean, that's all one can say at this stage.
When will we be able to judge whether it's been a success or not, Rachel Johnson?
Well, it's difficult with the Standard because you haven't really got the normal levers. You can't see the circulation falling. If advertising craters or something like that, or, I don't know, all the staff leave en masse.
Watch this space.
But you've got no circulation. You give the paper away. You give away as many copies as you like.
Yeah. Simon Jenkins, Rachel Johnson, many thanks indeed.
I've been